Welcome to Light Over Heat with Professor David Yamani. The professor is in. I'm here for my office hours to take your questions, so fire away. Today I have a question from Thomas Burris 2297 that came in response to my book chat with Dylan McLean about his book on guns and values. And Mr. Burris says, one thing I consistently see is a de facto assumption that gun control is good. Are you deferring to people you interview, or do you assume that gun control is the correct approach? And so I thought this was a very interesting question because in my mind, when I was talking to Dylan, we weren't really talking about the issue of gun control at all, but I know it is something that people are very interested in. People who know me know I personally try to stay out of gun politics per se, because it's just an arena in which we have far more heat and not much opportunity for light. But since I was asked, to sort of give my thoughts about gun control, I thought, why not? Here I go. So my general approach is to think about gun control as a sociologist, not as a binary that you either have it or you don't, but as a variable, right? That gun control exists on a continuum from more to less. There can actually be multiple different axes on which we consider gun control, right? So there are supply side approaches, there are demand side approaches, there are federal approaches, state approaches, local approaches. So really just to say gun control is a starting point, not an end point, right? That because it's a very complex, multidimensional variable. For myself personally, for example, there are laws that specify who can buy what guns and under what conditions, and that's gun control, right? When I buy firearms from FFL, I go through a NICS check. That's gun control. I don't protest that. If I'm selling a gun to a private individual, I want to see that that private individual is not a prohibited person, so I'll ask for, we used to in North Carolina have pistol purchase permits, but now I might ask to see a valid concealed carry permit. Again, that's gun control. And I think, the same thing goes on the other side, right? The gun rights is also a variable, not a binary condition, right? You don't either have gun rights or not, although, I know that there are many gun rights absolutists who say you either have gun rights or you don't. But I just think that empirically, that's not accurate. And, to make things even more complicated, gun rights and gun control exist in a dynamic tension with one another, right? So you have these two complex, multidimensional variables which also interact with one another over time and from place to place. This is one of the things that makes studying gun politics, which I don't do, but others do, this is one of the things that makes it interesting and challenging. And again, one of the books that is definitely at the top of my top 10 books on guns in America, Adam Winkler's book Gunfight, really captures the multiplicity of ideas of gun rights, gun control, and how they exist in a dynamic tension with one another over time. And this is one of the reasons why we have gun debates to this day, and one of the reasons why they're so fervent, and also one of the reasons I try to stay out of them. So that's the empirical reality in response to that question. That's what I think about gun control. But, this is me thinking as a sociologist. I think, maybe the YouTube questioner's question really was much more about my own personal position on gun control and maybe even gun rights on the flip side. Now, this would be my personal opinion because it falls outside of my area of expertise as a professor of gunology. And as my personal opinions, these things are subject to change, not necessarily things that I've thought through completely. But, I would say when I think about gun control, My concern is to reduce negative outcomes with firearms, right? To me, that is what the most important thing is. And gun control then would be only a vehicle to achieving that end. So gun control is nothing in and of itself. It's a vehicle toward reducing negative outcomes. And, so this may entail controlling guns themselves, right? Regulating gun stores, gun buying, gun possession. But in my view, this should all be done in a sort of targeted fashion, right? The things that are regulations or controlling guns generically for all people should be fairly minimal. We get more traction if we do more targeted efforts on those gun stores, those gun buyers of those guns, which are problematic. So you can do that. You can effectively control guns in a targeted fashion and still broadly respect the rights of gun owners. And I think more important than controlling guns is controlling negative behavior with guns. We can reduce negative outcomes, again, without any kind of blanket gun control. And, I think my views on this were deeply shaped, maybe fundamentally shaped even by this book by David Kennedy called Don't Shoot, One Man, a Street Fellowship, and the End of Violence in Inner City America, published in 2011, right as I was getting into the study of guns. And I learned in this book about these community-based gun violence prevention efforts, which were highly targeted. They, in fact, as Kennedy says, don't even really specifically look at guns primarily as the issue, right? They want to disrupt and reduce violence. And if you disrupt and reduce violence, you will disrupt and reduce gun violence without regulating guns at all, right? So, I think this, when I, again, think of if this is considered gun control, I'm all for it. It works. It's been documented to work. It's not easy to do, but it's there. We can also use current laws to punish irresponsible behavior. And I'm thinking about next week doing a hot take on the Crumley decision in Michigan, in which an existing law was used to punish irresponsible gun owner behavior. Still deciding whether that's a good idea. But, most importantly, from my perspective, is to figure out ways to empower people to make responsible decisions themselves, which will result in reducing negative outcomes with guns. So again, maybe this doesn't even properly fall under the rubric of gun control, but I think it's really important, right? We can talk about various plans for voluntarily relinquishing guns for people who feel like they may be having some sort of mental health crises or issues. We can talk about people making plans with their elderly parents, as Emily Betts and her team in Colorado talk about, figuring out what's going to happen when that elderly parent becomes diminished. Do you have a plan for that? That's something that every responsible gun owner should be thinking about, and it's easy to do. It may not be an easy conversation to have with an elderly parent any more than saying, should you be driving this car anymore? But it's essential, and it's something that can be done without any state regulatory involvement. Safe storage of firearms. I think this was what the Dylan McLean and I were talking about when that gave rise to the original question about this YouTube video on gun control. I think that there can be efforts to promote safe storage of firearms that don't require the government to say, you must safely store your firearms. And by safely store, we mean keeping the gun unloaded and locked up with the ammunition separate and locked up. That's just not an acceptable condition of safe storage for all people, right? The more important thing is for people to safely store their firearms in terms of not allowing access to those firearms to unauthorized people, right? That is a good form of gun control, in my opinion, and should be done. And then last would be sort of gun safety education, right? We live in a country in which there are hundreds of millions of firearms. They're a reality, whether people want to own guns or not, whether people like guns or not. Why do we not have gun safety education programs in schools? Why aren't every child in the United States taught what gun safety is, what it looks like, and how to do it? Right? This is something that, I think is a positive role for government to take in empowering people to make good decisions. So, in the end, my general take is very much informed by my friend Randy Mian of the Liberal Gun Owners, who insists that, firearms ownership rights and public safety are not contradictory, right? He often talks about, and I have to break out the Chinese finger trap, right? We often have a setup in our society, in our culture, in our politics that says, you can either have gun rights or you can have gun safety, right? Gun rights and gun safety are not opposed. Let's get out of that Chinese finger lock. That's my bottom line with respect to this. I think we can control guns. I think we can control irresponsible behavior with guns without running into some of the fears that people have of trampling on people's gun ownership rights. It's not a binary choice in the same way that gun control is not a binary and gun rights are not a binary. What do you think? I've probably said something here that's either not well thought through, contradictory on its own terms, or that has made you angry. So share your views in the comments. If you have further questions that you'd like me to answer in my office hours, the professor is in whenever you need me.